So we've got the body really to create all the, to create the spinous process and the um, articular processes and the transverse processes in this schematic version. All I did was make a rectangle and add little edges. Okay, so again, we might want to say create polygon primitive, uh, make a cube, and I'm just going to say go ahead and apply and create just basically a basic cube. And what we can do is scale it up so we can see it. Kind of scale it narrow. You can look at the diagram that I've supplied as your references to try to decide, how big it has to be. Now we're going to run into the same problem here. Let's say I'm making the transverse process. We're going to run into the same problem here as we did before. If I hit 3, so you get this very, very round. So all the polygons are subdivided in half, and you get a very round object, rounder than you want. So what I'm going to do instead is add a couple divisions to this, and I can go into the I should be able to go into this input box, and I've kind of messed around with it. So sometimes when you do that, it will not let you enter the input. It won't understand it well enough. Let's see what happens if I do that. Okay, so it's doing fine that way. Now if I do that, now you see how I'm much closer to what I want to be. I added those subdivision widths 4, and now I'm much closer to what I wanted to do. Maybe what I could do then as well, go back to 1 and maybe add a subdivision height. See, now I've kind of, because I have controlled the number of faces. When I hit the 3 for the preview, I'm now getting smaller faces subdivided, so that the change is much more subtle. And that's pretty much all you have to do to make the spinous processes and the inferior and superior articular process, and even the transverse processes. So 2 things. Let's just talk. Let's pretend this is a transverse process. We'll move it into position, relatively speaking. Let's see, be back here. So just as a point, maybe be a little bigger, a little wider. You want to get obviously a mirror image of this on the other side. So I'm going to go with this front view here, and we've got our process. I'm going to say edit, delete by type history. I'm going to say modify freeze transformations. So I should have everything 0, 0, and I'll leave it. I'm going to say modify center pivot, which is going to keep the pivot point where it is. Now if I hit W, what I want to do is I actually want to get the pivot point right to the mid-axis here, right? So let me turn on X-ray so you can see this. So what do? D gives me the pivot point. Clicking on the X-axis means my movement is constricted only in the X-axis. And then if I hold the letter D, the letter D for the pivot and the letter X both, it's snapping to the grid. So now that's the pivot point. So if I go to duplicate special and say scale this, -1, I'm going to say apply. See, now I get the mirror image. using this axis, because that's where the pivot point is, as the reference. Okay, so now I have my two transverse processes. If you don't, if you want to make this a little crisper here, in other words, you don't want it to be quite so round, how would you do that? You could go back and you could insert your own edge loop. And now you would have a bit more of a flattened edge, but really it's just a schematic, so you might keep it simple and just leave it like that. Okay.